Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Now, across different parts of the world, knowledge evolves in very different ways. Some systems are built on efficiency and speed, others on balance, awareness, and flow. But every now and then, those worlds intersect, and when they do, they challenge how we think about things we've taken for granted. Today, we are exploring that intersection. Joining me is Benjamin Couch, a martial artist and healthcare educator who has spent decades studying how movement, awareness, and body mechanics from martial arts can reshape the way we approach caregiving. Benjamin, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome to Thought Atlas.
Thank you so much, Bless. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome. So, Ben, before we kick things off, usually on Thought Atlas, I and my listeners, we want to get to know our guest on a personal level. So, if you don't mind, can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah. So my personal background that you've hit on a little bit is that and I still don't know why it's such a passion of mine, but at 8 years old, I started um, training in Taekwondo, and I've been exploring different martial arts ever since.
Yes.
I hate to say it, but that's over 40 years ago now.
Wow.
And I've just over that much time and with that many teachers, I've really been seeking out teachers my whole life. I've gotten black belt ranks in 8 different martial arts styles, from 500-year-old Japanese sword systems to
Wow.
karate systems. I run my own martial arts program in Tucson, Arizona, and it's been a passion of mine. And I think it intersects because what we're going to talk about is how I'm using that movement in healthcare. For me, it it I think a lot of people have thought it's always been an odd fit because I'm a deeply peaceful person. I hate
Yeah.
violence.
Yeah.
And there's a Japanese concept called Katsujinken, which means the life-giving sword. And it's this idea that, when you are a person who has influence or, in martial arts terms, who has power, you're
Yeah.
empowered to actually help people rather than hurt them. And that's what I've tried to embody myself over the course of those years. And professionally, in 2001, interestingly enough, I had no background in healthcare. I was actually finishing my master's degree in literature, which I came out to Arizona to work on that, and
Yes.
ended up staying here and falling in love with it. And while I was doing that, I started a martial arts program, just a couple days a week. And one of the people who was a student of mine was a CEO of a healthcare company, and they were pretty renowned for their hiring philosophy of find the right person and then create the role for them. And he thought he found a good person in me. I'm still grateful for that. And 20 years down the road, I was, he hired me, and I've spent over 20 years with the company as their director of training. And so, as that happened, and as the time went on, those worlds kind of started to meld for me. And then, when I started my own business last year, that's what I really wanted to bring to the world, is a way that we can take these mechanics and use them to help people.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. Benjamin, first off, thank you for letting us get to know you. And honestly, I think your background is a very eccentric one. Mixing healthcare with martial arts is just I can't wait to dive into it. I want to understand it. So, what first made you see a connection between martial arts and healthcare?
It was the history of it is kind of, it's just fun. It's fun how when we look at how things kind of come together. And several years ago, I met my this was around 2009. I met my primary teacher, and he was out of state. He lives in Texas. And
Yes.
so I would fly in every month. I would fly in to work with him. And we were sitting down to breakfast one morning before a long training session. We were waiting to be seated, and there was a gentleman who was a senior standing next to me while I was seated, waiting to be seated. You know, there was a line. They were going to take us to the table, and I saw his knee start to buckle, and I just stood up and put him back in place, you know, effortless. I didn't think about it. I just stood up and moved his body to where he was stable again and sat back down. We didn't talk, nothing. You know, he just kind of looked at me for a second, and we went back to normal. And I realized I actually just did jujitsu on him, but I did it to help him. And that kind of sat in the back of my head for quite some time. And one day it just hit me because in healthcare, the number one cause of injury is transfers. So that means when we're helping someone with limited mobility, we're helping them to stand up or sit down or get into the shower or get to the toilet. And when we're helping people move, we frankly don't do a real good job teaching on that. And in my role as a director of training, I got to see that very clearly.
Yes.
And it was interesting because it's hugely expensive. I mean, tremendous cost of workers' compensation, and just the injury and then the personnel cost. And I said, you know, why aren't we doing better? You know, because no one was looking at this. And it was just one of those things that seemed like we just accepted it as both a human and a financial cost of doing business. And that little moment came out from the back of my head and said, there's actually a much better way to do this, but you know, it's held pretty secret by, you know, martial arts masters, and you know, they don't teach that to a lot of people. And you know, those mechanics, they can help people. And that just popped into my, yeah, that moment popped back into my head one day, and I said, wait a minute, I think I have an answer.
Yeah. Wow. Mind-boggling. So how does it help? How does, martial arts help when it comes to healthcare?
So it's when you think about the mechanics of things, especially like body moving arts, like Japanese jiu-jitsu, um, Aikido, Tai Chi, those arts were designed to move larger, stronger people easily. And
Yes.
when you look over the course of time, you know, in healthcare, we've said, okay, what reduces the numbers? You know, what makes the best impact? When we look at how the martial arts were developed, they were developed by the people who survived. It was a very fast survival of the fittest process where they could weed out just by the people who lived what worked and what didn't. And they were very motivated because if it didn't work, then they knew their lives were on the line. So they studied intimately, very, very carefully, every aspect of body movement. So what got called into question because of the
Yes.
intensity of that study was the instinctual responses to things. So in martial arts, we rely on the other person's instinctual response. So I know that someone who's not trained, when I pull on them, they'll pull back. When I push them, they'll push me back. These are things that
Yes.
happen outside the realm of conscious thought. And I know, you know, I push you, you're going to push me. And as you're starting to push me, I know what to do. You know, I
Okay.
have created that response.
Yes.
So the trick is that we train ourselves to have different responses than the instinctual ones, than the subconscious ones. So things like one of the easiest ones to think about is, you know, when I pull someone, you know, in a healthcare situation, maybe I'm helping them to stand up. So I reach and grab what we call a gait belt, which is like a heavy canvas strap that goes around the person's waist
Yes.
so that we can, you know, have something strong to pull them on. And when people pull on that, typically they do what amounts to a bicep curl. So they're pulling with the bicep and the deltoid. That's an
Yes.
instinctual response. We just do that without, you know, no one ever thinks, okay, I'm going to use my biceps now. We just do it. A
Yeah.
stronger response, though, if we do think about it, the bicep and the deltoid are very weak muscles. They're very small muscles compared to other ones that we can use, like our triceps, our traps, our trapezius muscles, and our lats, our latissimus muscles. So
Yes.
instead of pulling the person, one change that you can make is we it sounds counterintuitive, but we push the person. So how do you push someone toward you? Well, if you grab something and think of not doing a bicep curl, but think of doing a row on a rowing machine. So now I'm
Yes, yes,
pushing my elbows backwards. And now I'm using much bigger muscles. Now, no one typically does that on instinct. But if we can train ourselves to do it smarter, that's how a small person can overcome a big person. It's not because they're somehow magical, it's because the other person's using their body less intelligently than we are. So if we take that intelligence and apply it to healthcare, it changes
yes.
everything.
Wow, wow. So, modern healthcare system often very procedural. Where do you think they fall short when it comes to, understanding movement?
So what I've seen and what I've, frankly, what I've taught, because this is just what's in the industry. This is how it's done. So when I was in a position that was not my own company, I kind of had to do it how it was done. And what gets
Yes,
taught is procedures. Okay, so when you're helping someone stand up, you put your feet a certain way, then you grab the belt, then you rock them toward, and it's a, step by step, and you've got a different procedure for every single possible out or possible situation you'll find yourself in. So if someone's sitting to standing, now they're standing up, how do you sit them back down? And it's the set of rules that you have to follow. And
yes,
first off, the world never works out that way.
yes,
There's always something strange. I think about like the home caregivers who are sent out to someone's house. Well, if they're sitting in a really deep chair, that's a little different than if they're sitting in a lawn chair versus a table and like at a kitchen table. Are there obstacles? Yeah, the world is a strange and constantly evolving place with weird situations. So procedures
yes,
can't really cover all of that because there's always something that doesn't quite fit into the mold. So I say that the program that I like to teach is principle based. So when you take that concept I just talked about, so pushing backward with your elbows, that applies no matter what, I'm never pulling with my biceps. That's a principle. So you can take that now, put it in a strange situation and say, okay, I know the principle is I push back with my elbows instead of doing a bicep curl. I've got this situation here in front of me. Now, how do I take that principle and apply it here? So it's something that's very malleable. It's something that as long as you're following the basic body principles, you can take those and apply them to any situation. And you don't have to worry that, oh, did I forget a step? No, we're just talking about how you exist in your own body and use it
yes.
in a more natural way.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for that wonderful response. Now, you talk about Eastern ergonomics. What does that mean? Can you break it down for us? And what kind of technique is that?
Yeah, so that's what I call my full program, and it's Eastern because the concepts that I use are Eastern, and that's how I differentiate the thinking on it. Our Western body mechanics are a little bit more focused on that procedural thinking. Now,
Yes,
where that's different is, if you go to elite athletes, so weightlifters, power lifters will use a lot of the principles that I use because they'll injure themselves if they don't. So much like those old warriors, they have a lot riding on their correct body mechanics. And it's not just money, it's their bodies. They'll be out of their sport, maybe their profession, and they'll hurt for the rest of their lives. So I
yes,
think a lot of elite athletes really look at these things, but that's a when I say Eastern, that's a nod to my influences. Where did these things come from for me, and kind of differentiates from the Western kinesthetic, and movement principles that we see. And then the ergonomics is just a word for, how we move. How do we hear it in terms of the office a lot, like having an ergonomic mouse, an ergonomic keyboard. And
yeah.
what it really means is just using your body correctly, using your body in a way that is most efficient and designed to keep
Safe.
you healthy for the long run.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Wow. Awesome. Now, in martial arts, awareness is everything. How does awareness translate into safer and more effective care?
I think this part is critical, and it's again back to that principle based philosophy where the way that it is taught in the West is all about your body and not about your mind. I'm sure there's some folks who, that might not be true for, but generally speaking, we talk about, okay, grab the person, do this, do that. And for me, when I educate people on this, I say, you start transferring someone before you walk into their room. Because if you go in on automatic pilot, that's where people get hurt. They're not thinking about it. They're thinking, I've got 17 more rooms to get to. What am I doing this weekend? Did I send my taxes in? All these things that steal us out of our bodies and out of the
Yes.
awareness of ourselves. So the first thing I say is, bring your attention to what you're doing right now. I even tell people, in your own heads, stop for literally 1 second and just say to yourself, I'm going to do a transfer. Because the recognition of that in your own head, bringing yourself back to what you're doing right now, it starts to put you back in your body. I can feel if I'm in my body, my back, I woke up and maybe my back is a little off today. I feel like there's a little twitch somewhere, and maybe I need to be careful about that. Or just recognizing, hey, this person, I remember their left knee is a little bit off. They were having a little trouble. I better be real careful about that.
Yes.
So when we come off autopilot and we treat each person as their own transfer. Each transfer is a unique, you know, there is one time in the entire history of the universe that this transfer will happen, and it is right now. And if we can be aware of how unique this moment is, then we'll have a much better connection to it. We'll have much less risk of injuring ourselves because we're frankly just paying attention. And that's what I take when I train people in martial arts. That's what I
Yes.
tell them is, I am not teaching you to do my karate. I'm teaching you to do your karate. I don't live in your body. It will not be the same as mine. And each person I teach is unique. There's an old cautionary tale that says, there's the teacher who's correcting someone, and another student overhears and starts making that correction too. And the teacher comes and yells at them and says, "Don't steal their correction. It's not yours." Because each person needs something different. And when we start just putting a procedure onto everything, treating every
Yes.
situation the same, that's when injury happens because we've taken all of the variables out of the equation and we're trying to make a stamped out factory item of everything that is just this mass produced thing that doesn't work in real life with real bodies.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for that wonderful clarification, Ben. Now, Ben, there's also a human element, especially when caring for people with dementia. Now, how does movement affect emotional connection and trust?
That's a big one, and dementia is a big one. Because that radically, it doesn't change the principles, but it changes the approach a lot. The human factor, not just body, but you know, mind, and if you go that direction, spirit is an intrinsic part of the situation. So again, that there's that almost removal of that in the Western method where it's just a procedure. We lose track of the human being. So, when I just for instance, my mom has dementia, she has Alzheimer's disease, and she still recognizes me. And when I help her transfer, there's trust there. Even though she may be confused, she recognizes me still and she's fine with it. If I went to someone who didn't know me, didn't have
Yes.
trust in me, and I went to just grab them and move them, they may feel attacked. They may feel uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes.
I would. If someone just walked up to you and started yanking you out of your chair, you'd probably feel uncomfortable too.
Yeah, definitely.
So understanding, and this is another thing that in the healthcare space, we're so stretched. Everyone is stretched thin, and there's a staffing shortage among caregivers and nurses. So the first thing to go, I think, is the human connection a lot of the time, where we are not, as let's say that caregiver, their performance review is not necessarily based on how much people like them or trust them. It's based on, did you get X number of rooms, you know, out to dinner, X number, and it's, kind of an assembly line. So
Yes.
when we're in healthcare, one thing that I think is crucial, and the places that are built for long-term success are focused on knowing the humans, are knowing the people that they're serving, and they know, uh, Mr. Smith does not like being approached from behind and touched. He gets very nervous.
Yes.
He likes to have you in front of him and say what you're going to do before you do it. Mrs. Johnson likes to eat her dinner at 7 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. because at 5 p.m. she gets really agitated. So don't try to transfer her at 5 p.m. And it's and again, I think this goes back to, for me, it's my life context, so everything goes back to martial arts. But a big part
Yes.
of martial arts is courtesy and etiquette. So, and I always tell people that's part of safety, because it's essentially saying, when we line up for class and we bow to each other, I always tell my students, it's not you bowing to me because I'm so great and I'm the teacher. We bow to each other
For
because we
respect.
are non-verbally entering into a contract saying we are all here to learn and grow together, including me.
Yes.
And, throughout the class, that has to get reinforced to keep people safe. Now, in healthcare, we're also trying to keep people safe, and that requires a certain common agreement between people, the residents or patients and the staff, that we are all working toward the same goal, which is a comfortable living environment, safety, engagement, and a life that matters, a life worth living, right? And
Yes.
when we breach that contract by just going in and treating people like they're widgets on an assembly line, we run into real problems. And that's where people get aggressive, people get upset. Maybe they have dementia and they can't communicate. We're trying to drag them to dinner and they have to go to the bathroom and they can't say that. Well, how would you or I respond in that situation? It's, that etiquette of knowing the person that you're helping and having that common agreement. That's where trust comes from, the common agreement. I am here to help you live your best life. And when we lose
Yes.
track of that etiquette and that courtesy, we're in big trouble. That we can't provide real healthcare that way. We can just, meet our numbers, but that's not healthcare.
Yes. Now, do you think modern systems tend to ignore older or non-Western knowledge too quickly?
Uh, do I think modern what? Sorry.
Modern systems tend to ignore older or non-Western knowledge too quickly.
Um, I do. I think there's a real tension between those things, maybe a healthy tension. Because, if you would, when, if we're talking, the Thought Atlas podcast, we want to talk about some of the thinking behind it. If we go
Yes.
into like Chinese yin and yang theory, um, it's this idea of the harmony of opposites.
Yes.
And, I think that, and you'll see this in like Taoist thought, if you go so far in one direction, you actually end up with a problem. And you actually end up wrapping back around to have a problem in the other area because you're out of
Oh,
balance. So,
oh,
in my experience, tradition for tradition's sake is kind of dead. If we're only following the procedures, if we're only doing mimicry, which happens a lot, people doing, in martial arts, people doing things they don't know why they're doing them, and
yes.
that really propelled me into a lot of my research over the years. Like, well, why are we doing these funny postures? What, it must mean something because, again, survival of the fittest, and no one seemed to know why. And I just kept asking why. Um, so I think things can get lost in tradition. It's like having a book but not knowing how to read. Um,
Yes.
and then I think on the other side of the equation, modern systems tend to throw away tradition just because it's traditional, because they've asked why and not gotten a satisfactory answer. And that was my experience, but I just I was insatiable. I just kept digging. So I think those two things come together to be really productive. That modern question of why, and not just mimicking for the sake of mimicry, but also, if we take that why question that drives a lot of modern arts and systems, and we go back and
Yes.
look at, how do we apply that, and how do, because a lot of that old knowledge is coded. A lot of that old knowledge was, very deep thought was put into it. And it's just
Yes.
there aren't that many people who have that information to decode it. So I
Yes.
think the two come together really well. That's kind of where I've landed as a teacher is, you know, taking the old forms and saying, okay, how do we analyze them with our modern minds and get to the real heart of things, the real exploration, because that's ultimately, if we just take a tradition and we just run with it for 100 years and we lose track of why, that's what we'd really usually call a dead art. It's just people
Yes.
pantomiming with no purpose.
Yes. Wow. Wow. Thanks so much for that clarification, Ben. Now, Ben, for someone listening who isn't in healthcare, what's one principle from this work they can apply in everyday life?
Um, One principle, I think, probably balance is the best one to talk about from that perspective. So because it bridges so clearly the mental and the physical, because physically we can see very clearly if I'm off balance. That's one piece again, I start with, okay, what's our mindset, what's our breathing, and what's our posture?
Yes.
Because if our breathing and our posture are not correct, then we're starting off balance. Then we start in a losing, or a situation that's likely or more likely to go wrong. So, understanding our connection to the ground is a critical thing. How we hold our weight and how we keep our posture as a biped, because bipeds have very specific rules.
Yes.
Bipeds, especially with knees that bend forward. So as we look at how that happens and how our bodies work, um, and how that connects to the mental, when we stand straight, our body is like a skyscraper.
Yes.
And we know we can build skyscrapers unbelievably high. Of a couple hundred years ago, they never would have thought it was possible to do that. And that's where, we look at that modern building of knowledge and we say, wow, that we couldn't have done this before. So there's real value in the modern quest to understand more. But if you look at, say, the construction crane that has to do all that lifting to get things, on the back side of that crane is a real heavy weight to counterbalance that. If you just tried to pick it up, you have this arm reaching out 100 feet in the sky trying to lift stuff up. Without that
Yeah.
counterweight, it goes right over.
Yep.
And the lesson I'm working on personally, and I think we all probably need this, is we all have cell phones now, and we spend our whole day tilting our heads forward to look at them, or our tablets or our laptops, and that's like building a skyscraper with a leaning top. And as soon as we get out of our posture, we are much more likely to fall over. I do the physical demonstration in the class. I'll have people stand up straight and push on them so they can feel it. And then I'll tip their head about a quarter of an inch. and I do the same thing, and they have to take a step because their balance, just that little switch, completely alters their balance. And then you look at how that applies back to mentally, you know, and again, this is something that I think in the West we're very mental in the West. We spend a lot of
Yes.
time in our heads, and so we think, and it's not entirely wrong. We think, we can fix what's going on with our heads by thinking more. I'm depressed, and I'm not knocking this at all, but I'm depressed, and we go to say a counselor or a therapist, and we
Yes.
talk and we think and we try to get new thought processes going, and that's wonderful. And I've done it myself, but very rarely do we look at, what, if you fix your body, messages travel both ways. We treat our bodies like, our minds are the source of everything. And what we're discovering, in the last couple decades is that information travels both ways. So my body affects my brain too. When you
Wow.
stand in good posture, notice what happens to your attitude, to your mind. When you fix your posture, it's very hard to be, I mean, truly depressed or maybe I should say it's easier to be confident than it is. Sorry, I've got a little piece going on here.
Okay. It's all good. Mm.
There we go. Um,
Okay.
so when I fix my body, when I fix my posture, my brain tends to start to realign. There is a connection back to that. So we've got this kind of positive cycle going where, I start maybe thinking, I want to get out of the mood that I'm in. I want to feel better.
Yes.
I'm not satisfied with it. So maybe I start looking at my thoughts, and maybe I start contemplating a little bit. And then I go to my body and I say, okay, what if I straighten up? What if I, have a good meal? We have that, Snickers commercial about getting hangry, right? I tend to do that. I'll get annoyed, and my wife will say, Ben, you need to eat something. And it's true. My body is telling my brain something's wrong. So we start taking care of our bodies, and that cycles back to our brains, and then we can establish that positive feedback loop between the two. So it's a it's
Yes.
it's a kind of long answer to the question, but I think they're intimately connected.
Wow. 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 Funny how that was literally the next question I wanted to ask. If you think there's a mind to body connection, you've just answered it for me. That's awesome. Now I have some rapid fire questions I want to ask you. You can either answer with a phrase or a sentence. And I want you to know that both options are available. If you cannot pick one or the other, you can pick both of them. So
Okay,
the first one is strength or balance.
balance.
For real. What about strength? Or if you have balance, you definitely have strength, I think. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Uh, uh, Sorry, say that one more time.
I said, do you want to elaborate on it? I said I
Oh,
was thinking,
sure. Um,
okay.
Strength does no good without balance. I can have, again, back to my skyscraper metaphor, I can have, you know, a, the strongest beams in the world, but if I build it at a 45-degree angle, it's going to fall over.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how a smaller person can defeat a larger person, through better balance, through better structure in their bodies. If you've got a very strong person who's off balance, when we're falling, strength doesn't matter because
Wow.
it's so deeply ingrained in human thought, or in human instinct. If you think about the moment when, let's say, you're walking toward the sidewalk and you're not paying attention, and you step off the curb and you didn't realize, you just suddenly you drop. For that
Yes.
second, when you're off balance, you're not thinking about, is there a car coming to run me over? You're only
Yeah.
thinking about recapturing your balance. Our
Yes.
brains shut off completely, and that's a martial arts principle. If we want to throw somebody, we can't throw them when they're structured. We have to off balance them. When they're off balance, they aren't thinking about hitting us. They're not thinking about throwing us. They're only thinking about catching their balance. So, frankly, I think, I'd take balance all day. I think strength without balance is useless. Now, if you've got both, that's ideal.
Wow, awesome. So the next one is force or flow.
Flow. Um, what happens when you run up against a stronger force? You're done.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
all, flow is something that can work with anything. Um, but when two forces collide, whoever's stronger wins. And I'm not the strongest guy, so I can't count on that. I'm not, I'm 5'9", I'm 180 pounds, a guy who's 6'4" and 200, and I've had those students, and
Yes.
they come in and they're used to having their way with force. And they run up against me, little old me, and I'm tossing them all over, and they can't believe it. And it's
Wow.
because I've got balance and I've got flow, and they don't. So, force and or
Fluid.
balance and flow all day, every day.
Okay, awesome. So the next one is technique or awareness.
Ooh, I don't think you can separate the two. How can you have technique you're not aware of? Um,
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna pass on that one because I think you need both.
Yes. Okay. So the next one is control or adaptation.
Ooh, um, adaptation. Um, Again, I think those two are intimately tied together, but control in the human mind means typically something outside yourself. I want to
Yes.
control another person. Well, I can't control another person. I have to control myself. So that lets me adapt. If I go in again, if I want to control someone else or something outside me,
Yes.
that's, I may or may not be able to. All I can really control is myself. And when everything else in the world goes, um, I can hopefully still at least control my attitude and how I want to think about things. Because ultimately, how much control do we have in the world? How much we like to think that we have control. Um, and any moment it can all be gone. There's going to
Yeah.
come a time for all of us where we pass away, and there's no controlling that. And as much as we
Yes.
ignore it, as much as we want to pretend that won't happen, someday we will lose control. But
Definitely.
if we can adapt to that, if we can understand it and accept it, then we can retain who we are. And I think that's sometimes the only control we can have.
Wow. I love that. Thank you so much for that wonderful response. So this is my final question for the rapid fire. What is one word you would use to define movement?
Hmm, interesting question. Um, Transient. Every movement is
Transcend.
passing away the moment that it starts. Um,
Wow.
yeah. And as
Wow.
long as we hang on to that, as long as we try to make it permanent, as long as we try to make a technique work, that's where my students, it takes years to get them out of this. And that's instinctual too. Let's say I want to put someone in a certain lock and they resist. Eckhart Tolle, and he probably didn't come up with this phrase, but that's where I heard it, said, "What we resist persists." And if we try to resist someone else's movement, if we try to insist on our own movement and resist the situation, it has already stopped. As soon as someone resists what we do, our movement is already over, but we try to make it keep happening. That goes back to that trying to control everything, that control freak moment.
Yes.
Everything we do is transient, and we have to be okay with that. Every movement we make ends. Every step we take melds in with the next step. And that's not just physical movement, that's everything in life. So it's all transient. It's all arising and passing away like a bubble on the stream that pops the next second.
Wow. Honestly, I love the way you tend to describe things, Ben. It's absolutely mind blowing and it's just wonderful. So, Ben, this
Thank
is my final question before we wrap up for today. When you step back and you reflect on everything you've learned, what is one idea about the body, movement, or care that you think people fundamentally misunderstand?
Uh, I think I think it's the purpose of muscles. Um, we treat muscles like they are the solution. We treat muscles like they are what gets the job done. And that's why we get injured. Um, and really, the job of muscles is to align our skeletons. They align our structure into a powerful position. Um, they move things to the place where we are strong. You know, you think
Yes,
about you think about how we pick up a box from the floor. We use our muscles to bring it to where we're, where it's in our center of gravity, and now our structure can take over, and we lift. Yet every movement happens with our muscles, but if we think about again moving that outside force, you know, picking up that barbell or picking up that box or picking up that human being, it's not
yes,
really about what's happening out there. The muscles put things inside our bodies into position to be strong. And so again, when we take that focus off what's happening outside of us, that control freak self again that's trying to
yes.
control things outside of us, when we use our muscles to control our internal structure, then we become really powerful.
Wow, wow. That's mind blowing. Ben, this has been a very fascinating conversation, especially how something as physical as movement can reshape how we think about care, safety, and human connection. It's honestly been a pleasure to have you on my podcast. Thank you for enlightening us, teaching us about how understanding our movement, understanding our body is very, very much important. How can my listeners, learn more about your work, connect with you, and get copies of your book?
For sure. So the first place to check us out is easternergonomics.com. That's all one word, easternergonomics.com. Um, the company website, that's the program I offer. My overall company website is illumined.com. Sorry. Be
Yes,
helpful if I could spell my own website.
yes,
ELUMENED.com.
yes,
And um, I've got a book on Amazon called Creating Meaningful Moments, and that's with my co-author Kelly Ording, who was the national director of memory care at the company that I worked at. My Illumined company, it is the container for Eastern Ergonomics, but it also has a lot of home and family caregiver education around dementia. That's another passion of mine. Like I said, my mom has Alzheimer's disease, and
yes,
that's a very personal project for me where I try to help people out who are in that home and family space and maybe don't have the training and formal education. They're just winging it and doing their
yes.
best. I try to help them feel not so alone in that.
Wow. Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure to have you. And I'm sorry about your mom's condition. I really hope and wish her all the best. And I pray that you'll be able to help her recover fully, even if not fully, at least to reasonably well
Thank
away
you,
from,
Blessing.
our current condition. You're welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
Ben, it's honestly been a pleasure to have you on my podcast. Thank you for your time. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to, enlighten I and my listeners. It's been a very wonderful conversation. I've had lots of fun. I've learned a lot. And thank you so much. You have a wonderful day and do take care of yourself. And also, please
Thank you
don't
so
forget
much.
to leave
Yeah,
a review on the podcast. It helps to find more wonderful guests like yourself.
it's really wonderful to be here. This is a great conversation. Thank you, Blessing.
Take care, Ben. Have a good
Okay.
day.
Bye bye.